Hey, it's Alex. I've been wanting to do tutorials for like kind of a long time now, so this is going to be my first tutorial on Game Maker Studio. We're going to be making an FPS game today. Um, just so you know, there might be some jump cuts. I don't do very well with unscripted videos, but I'm going to do my best. Hopefully it'll turn out okay. I know there's a lot of Game Maker tutorials out there for FPS games and stuff, but this one's going to use a lot of techniques that I like to use personally when I make 3D games, and I haven't really seen a lot of other people use them, so hopefully I'll be able to bring something new to the table. As you can see, I have like a whole bunch of sprites here. This is the starter pack. You can download this in the description. Feel free to use all these sprites if you want. There's a sound effect in there and some backgrounds that we're going to be using for textures. Yeah. Before we start like making this, I'm going to show you what we're going to be making in this particular in this part. This is the first of 3 parts. So we have this 3D environment with some brick walls here. We can look around with the mouse, and we can run into the walls. And that's literally all we can do. We can't jump or crouch or anything. But this is what we're shooting for in this first part of the video. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a new object. I'm going to call this obj control. Whoops. Instinctually press enter. And in obj control, this is just a couple of things that I like to do. Step event, and I'm going to add some debug controls because we're going to be locking the mouse, and so we won't be able to press the X button, so we're going to make the game close when you press enter. I mean escape, sorry. So we got that. Now let's create, we have 3 other objects we want to make. Obj player, obj wall, and obj floor. They should be pretty self-explanatory. For the player, I'm going to give it the SPR player sprite. For the wall, I'll give it the wall sprite, and for the floor, I'll give it the floor sprite. Okay, now first let's open up the obj floor object and go add event, and let's give it a draw event, and add a code thing. I'm going to go ahead and make this bigger so it's easy to see. I'm going to just call this draw floor. Now, when you're working with 3D, you have several functions that will just draw 3D primitives for you. And the one in particular, like they all start with D3D draw. And as you can see, we have like several here: D3D draw block, cone, cylinder, ellipsoid, floor, and wall. The one we're going to use is floor because it's the floor object. If we look here at the bottom, we can see that we have our arguments are x1, y1, and z1, x2, y2, z2, text ID, h repeat, and v repeat. These like coordinates, it should be kind of self-explanatory if you've ever used like draw rectangle or something like that. You know, you give it 2 points and it just stretches a box between them. This is kind of the same thing, except it just uses 3D coordinates. So you give it 1 point, you give it a second point, and it will stretch a 3D plane between them. So if we take a look at our floor sprite, this is a 16 by 16, just a white square. Origin is 0, 0. And how we're going to be using this, we'll create a room here, just so I can show you what we're going to be doing when we build a level. Grab my floor object. So a lot of games, like, they'll either like place one of these down and they'll just like kind of just draw a floor over the entire room, or they'll like tile it like, hold on, yeah, they'll just tile it across like that or something, but I think that's kind of inefficient. And what I like to do and this gives you a little more, flexibility in terms of like level design. It's like I'll place one down and then I'll stretch it like this, and then the way we're going to code the object is that it's going to cover a floor across the whole like where the object is stretched based on its image X scale, image Y scale, stuff like that. So in our room, I'm just going to place one of these down, stretch it across like that, and while I'm at it, I'm going to change the room width and height to 1280 by 720 and the room speed to 60. I'm going to close out of that. And now we'll draw, or we will code the floor. So first thing we want the width and height. So our width is going to be image X scale times 16 because our sprite is 16 across and 16 down, and we'll do the same for the height. Image Y scale times 16. And now in our D3D draw floor function, our first point is going to be X, Y, and 0 for the Z. And then our second point is going to be X plus W, X, the width, Y plus H, and 0, because we want it to just be a flat plane, so both Z values are going to be 0, because Z is up, if you didn't catch on. Now texture, that's going to be, well, I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? It's the texture. But we can't just put the background in there. We have to actually get the texture data. So we'll go text equals background get texture. Oops. And then we'll feed the background into this function, and that will get like the texture data for that, and then we can use text in there. Now, H repeat and V repeat, these are basically how many times the texture like loops around. So like if you put like 1 and 1 there, then it will take this texture, this floor texture tile thing, and it will just stretch like one of it over, like just one, like it like won't tile it, it'll just stretch it across this entire space here. But we don't want to do that. We want it to loop, and we want it to loop like proportionally, like based on like how big we make that floor. So width is going to be 16. No, H repeat is going to be width divided by 16, sorry, and V repeat will be height divided by 16. These can be, I mean, you can change these numbers if you want the texture to be like bigger or smaller, It's trial and error, but I've kind of calculated how I want to make this one, so these are the numbers that I found to work pretty good, Now the reason we created the floor object first is so that we have something to look at when we create the player object. So now we'll go into the player, open up the player, add a create event, add a code window, and I'm going to call this init player. First thing we want to do, D3D start. This starts the 3D mode, so it'll actually draw stuff in 3D. I'm going to go ahead and type display reset so that we can turn on anti-aliasing. No, not anti-aliasing, but vsync. I don't want to use anti-aliasing right now, but we do want to use vsync. Well, I do anyway. Doesn't matter. You don't have to. Draw set color C white. The reason we want to do this is because if we don't, the default draw color is black, and if we don't make it white, then we will, it'll just be a black screen. We will never see anything. So now we'll actually we'll start thinking about the variables that we want this player to have. I think I'll make a stats section, I guess. You're probably going to want HP, I guess. I mean, we're not really going to cover like dying and stuff in this, so. But I mean, if you're gonna be making an FPS game, you might want HP, player height. We'll set that to 32, I guess. It's a good number. Now we have several variables that we want for mouse look, which this is the first thing we'll be making in this player object. We're gonna want x2, y2, and z2. These are going to be variables where it's basically going to be a point in space where the camera is looking at, and we're going to be changing this point when you move the mouse around. So first x2 will be x plus 1. I mean, when we initialize like the camera, like we'll just be making it point to the right, I guess, if that makes sense. Y2 equals y, and z2 equals player height. These are just the starting values. They'll change later. And then lastly, controls. This will make it easier to, I don't know, this just makes it easier. I like to do this. So forward is going to be W. Back will be S. Left will be A. And right will be D. Now, let's close out of that. Now in the player object, we're going to create a draw event, add a code block in there. And we're going to call this one draw camera. The function to draw a 3D camera is d3d set projection. And but the better one to use is d3d set projection extra, or whatever ext means. Now we have a whole bunch of arguments to put in here. So we have x from, y from, and z from. Now what those are is basically the physical like position of the camera. So, well, we want the camera to be at our player object, right? So we'll make x from x, y from is y, and z from is player height, because that's like the height of the player, so, you know. Next we have x2, y2, and z2. Well, that's, you know, we just created those variables, so let's just plug those in. The next things are x up, y up, and z up, and this is a vector which represents the up direction, and we want that to be, we want the z-axis to be up, so we'll type 0, 0, 1 for that. Angle is the field of view. I find 75 to be okay. Aspect is the aspect ratio, so if you have a 16:9 monitor, you'll want to put 16 divided by 9 in there, right? If you have a 16:10 monitor, 16:10, you know, whatever. Z near and Z far. That's basically like, I think that's like the draw distance of the camera. But I like to make Z near just 1 and Z far just some giant number like that. Don't make this 0 though. Don't make Z near 0 or you'll have problems. Let's close out of that. And now let's go back into this room. And I'm going to place a player object. And I'm going to run the game just to see if we can see anything. Oh, that's okay, perfect. So we set up the camera in the player object, and we set up a 3D like floor that we're drawing on the level, and we can see it. So that's perfect. It's perfect. This is exactly what we want. Now, before we go any farther with the player object, let's go ahead and make our wall object. And the same thing goes with this wall object. I've seen a lot of people where they just make it draw like a box, and then they like tile a whole bunch of them. But what I want to do, I like to do this. I like to place one of them and then just stretch it like that. So I'm just gonna place one in this level already and then just stretch it like that, so that we have something to see when we test the game. Now in our wall objects, let's create a draw event, add a code block, and I'll call it draw wall. Now we actually have two things we could use, I guess. D3D draw block, which a lot of people use, but because we're doing the stretchy thing, I'm going to use D3D draw wall. And we're going to use this 4 times. But first, let's set up all the stuff we want for like the arguments, so like the texture and stuff. So text, background, get texture, and then the background that we have is bg_brick. The width is going to be image x scale times 16. The height is image y scale times 16. And we're going to have a height for these because it's, it's a wall. Let's just make it 64. Now, with these walls, we're going to do it 4 times. So we're going to draw the top wall, the bottom wall, the left wall, and the right wall. And what I mean by that is, like, if we go in here, we place one of these down, the top wall is going to be this side, bottom wall is this side, this is left, and this is right. Okay. So let's say top wall, and the top wall, oops, I'll just leave this in the level, doesn't matter. Well, X is going to be, the origin on this wall sprite is also 0, 0, so we're going to be starting from this point, and we're going to be stretching a wall to this point, so we will use, whoops, hold on. So we want our first point on this wall to be X, Y, 0. And the second point is going to be X plus W, Y, Z. Because we want it to have height, so the Z is going to be stretched from 0 to Z, and Z is 64. So it's going to be 64, it's going to have a height of 64, and it's going to have a width of this, right? And the Y stays the same. Because if you notice, like, this Y value is the same as this Y value. And then text, for H repeat and V repeat, I found that the width divided by 8 is it's good for H repeat, and the V repeat is Z divided by 8. We're using Z for the V repeat because it is the wall, the texture, it's standing up, right? So we're using its height. Bottom. We're going to do something, it's going to be very similar, X plus W, but we're going to be, it's going to be kind of like flipped around, basically. So we're putting the XW first this time. Y plus H, 0, X, Y plus H, Z, text, W divided by 8, Z divided by 8. Oops. We have Y plus H because this is on the bottom now, so we're adding the height to both of these so that this will appear on the bottom of the wall. I'm going to test this just to see if we're on the right track, I guess. And we are not. There's going to be an edit here, but we forgot one thing about the player. The depth needs to be very high. The depth on whatever object draws your camera needs to be higher than everything else, or else it won't work. So now that we set the depth, let's run the, okay, yeah, now we can see the walls, and we are missing this like the others, the sides, so we'll add the sides in there. Left, D3D draw wall. Hopefully it makes sense why we're doing this now. Z, text, H divided by 8, Z divided by 8. And now we'll do the right wall. d3d draw wall x plus w y 0 x plus w y plus h z text h divided by 8 z divided by 8. Again, like, feel free to mess around with like these numbers, like in the HVP and VVP, like you can divide it by a different value if you want the text to be like bigger or smaller, stuff like that. But now we should have the walls working or drawing everything properly. We don't need to bother drawing a floor and a ceiling for these because they like we'll never see those in this demo, I guess. Now let's go back to our player and we'll actually code like mouse look and stuff like that. So in our player object, add the step event, and in the step event add a code window, and I'll call this mouse look. And this is where it's going to get pretty interesting, I guess. We want the basically what we want is to lock the mouse cursor to the center of the screen. So that's what we'll do that. Reset mouse position. We'll make 2 local variables. Okay, now center X and center Y are basically a point at the middle of the screen. And now we're going to use display mouse set center X and center Y. So now this function will set the mouse to the center of the screen. It's going to be locked there pretty much. And now we will basically calculate turning, I guess. So we're going to be using the object's direction variable, and basically this is like hard to explain how it works, but display, we're going to do direction minus equals display mouse get x minus display get width divided by 2 divided by 8. The whole thing's divided by 8. And then there's one other thing I forgot to do. Go back into the create event of the player. Add one more variable here, zdir, and set to 0. I forgot to add that, sorry. And then under this, now back in the step event for mouse look, let's go zdir minus equals display mouse get y minus display get height divided by 2 divided by 10. Now what this does is basically I'll discuss this one. This changes the direction of the object, right, based on how far the mouse has moved away from the center of the screen. So it gets the difference between the center of the screen horizontally and the mouse X position on the screen. Then it divides that by 8, and this divisor, it will basically, this controls the mouse sensitivity basically. So if you want to change, if you want the mouse sensitivity to be like higher or lower, you would change this. And well, this is like zdir does the same thing. It's just vertically. So it gets the Y position and the center of the screen vertically. It takes the difference, divides it by 10. It's slightly different. I don't know why. I just found that 8 and 10 to be good numbers for that. The next thing we want to do is we don't want to be able to like look up infinitely, so we will clamp zdir. So var, let's just say zmax, I guess. And I found that 70 is a good number. Actually, we don't even need to have that. We'll just say zdir equals clamp zdir minus 70. So this just sets a limit on zdir. Now what we want to do is we want to use these variables to calculate like what the x2, y2, and z2 variables should be. So this is kind of complicated. I have to explain something. Imagine that, like, just ignore that. Get rid of it. Imagine that this is like a side view of our character. The x2, y2, and z2, I think I explained it before, is basically like a point in space where the camera is going to be looking at. And the way that most FPS tutorials do it is they just when you change this zdir value, like they don't even have this. They just make the z2. They just make the z2 this difference, and so what you get with that is you have a point in space that when you look up, it goes like, let's say this point is right here, and you move the mouse up, it would go like up here or something, and then you move up more and it would go up here, right? But then what you have is an effect where like the camera gets like more and more stiff like the farther up you look or the farther down you look, and that's because like the difference between like this spot and this spot is a lot less, is like it's less than this spot and this spot because of the angle. See, like I'll try to make sense of this. Whoops. So let's say like this is the angle that you're looking at. If you move up, like this angle difference is like a lot larger than the angle difference between these two. You see what I mean? And that's why you would have like a stiff, like the camera would just get stiffer and stiffer the farther you look up, and that's not good. What you ideally want is the whole, like the point to move, like if the point's here and you look up, you'd kind of want it to move in an arcing like motion like that. And that's what we're going to accomplish today. So first we want to convert the direction to radians. And we want to convert the z to radians, zdir to radians. Now, this took me forever to figure out, but this is how you do it. X plus cosine of d times the absolute value of sine zd plus sine, not like the trig sine, the sine of zdir. If you don't know what this sine does, sine with a G, it basically returns like +1 if you give it a positive number and -1 if you give it a negative number. Oops. Now y2 equals y minus sine, the sine of d, like as in the trig function, sine of d, absolute value of sine of zd plus positive negative sine of minus zdir. Now z2 equals, it's a lot simpler, but player height plus sine zd, sine of zd. And we don't need those parentheses there, actually. This is pretty complicated, but this should give us the perfect mouse looking that we want. Hopefully I didn't mess this up. I have messed it up. Okay, I have messed it up. I typed display get width here. Down in the reset mouse position, type change this to display get height. Okay, now it works. So we can look around with our mouse. We can look straight up and straight down, and it doesn't mess up with our mouse speed. So that's looking pretty good. I forgot to put that control object in here, so I can't exit with escape, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Control. Okay. Now, before we code the movement, I'm actually just going to go in and place some more wall objects. Okay. Here's another problem. The player object is below the floor, and that kind of just makes it harder to edit the room. So instead of, in our player object, instead of having a very low depth or high depth, make it a low depth. So I'm going to make this negative, and in the create event, I'll just set the depth to something very high. And then once we do that, we can see the player in our room editor, but we won't have to, it'll still work because we're setting the depth. And I'm going to add one more wall in here just for good measure, I guess. Now back in our player object, we'll actually add movement, a movement script, add a code block, and make sure this is in front of mouse look, or else it will break. Just because of the way that I'm doing it. And we'll call this script movement. And first, oh, I forgot the setup. I forgot the variables. Sorry. Go back to your create event in the player, and I guess here we'll add a section for movement variables. Get that out of here. And we want a few. So first we want move f equals 0 and move s equals 0. These are basically going to be how fast you move forward and how fast you're strafing. And then I have like a v speed and an h speed variables, and these are, we're going to be like using these to calculate how fast you're moving forward and how fast you're strafing, but we're going to be using, like, I'm using these to like actually move the player around so that it's easier to calculate like collisions and stuff. And then we'll have like an acceleration variable. So this is how fast you'll accelerate, and a max speed, which I thought 0.5 and 3 I thought were pretty good for this. So now let's close out of that, go back to our movement script. All right. So first we want to check if we're pressing a key and like actually like move, like gain speed. So we'll call this gain speed, I guess. And for this we'll do move f plus equals keyboard check forward times excel. Yeah, times excel. If you don't know, keyboard check, like if you're pressing the key, this will just evaluate to 1. So it'll see this as 1 times acceleration if you're pressing this key, and if you're not pressing the key, it'll be 0 times acceleration, so it will not be adding to that variable. Move f minus equals keyboard check back. Whoop. Keyboard check back times excel. And now for strafing, move s plus equals keyboard check left times excel. Move s minus equals keyboard check right times excel. Now this will let us move around. Well, this won't let us move around yet, but we're working on it. Let's cap the max speed. So move f equals clamp move f minus max speed, move s equals clamp move s minus max speed. Oops, that should be comma. Oh wait, that should be max speed. All right. Now we'll have checks for if we're not pressing any keys, and we'll like slow the character down so that, you know, otherwise we'd press a key and we'll continuously move forward like we're on ice or something. Slow down. If not keyboard check forward and not keyboard check back and move F not 0 not equal to 0, move F minus equals XL times the sign of move F. Sign as in the positive or negative. If, we'll do the same thing for the strafing. If keyboard check left and, no, if not keyboard check left and not keyboard check right and move S not equal to 0. Move S, then move S minus equals XL times sine move S. Oops. That should not be a semicolon, that should be an L. So this checks if we're not pressing forward and we're not pressing backward, and our forward movement is, we have a forward movement. And if we do have a forward movement and we're not pressing anything, then we'll slow down by subtracting the acceleration times the sign of this. So if it's negative, we'll be adding to it so that it hits 0, and if it's positive, we'll be subtracting so it hits 0. And the same thing goes for the strafing movement. Now we'll apply the movement to the player, to the x and y variables of the player. So we'll go h speed equals length dir x. Length dir x, and in our length dir x we'll do move f, and for the direction, right? This is a forward direction, plus length, we're going to be adding our the strafe movement to this as well. So length dir x move underscore s, direction plus 90. The v speed equals length dir y move f direction plus length dir y move s direction plus 90. We are adding 90 to this because it's strafing, so we want it to be horizontal, or we want it to be perpendicular to our forward direction. Now we'll actually add it to the x and y. So x plus equals hsp, y plus equals vsp. Now let's test it out and see if this works. I've carefully adjusted it to work, so it should work. And hey, look at that, we can move around. We can move around, we can look around. We can't collide with walls yet. We can walk right through them, but that's okay. Shut up. Now we'll add the collisions. It's actually just a few lines. So this kind of seems like a weird way of doing the collisions, but I found it to work very well. It might not be really efficient. I don't know, but basically we're going to use a while loop, and if it finds that we are moving into a wall, then it will push us out of the wall, basically. So while, we'll use a while loop, while place meeting, hold on, I'm going to add some space so that this is kind of close to the top. While place meeting, x plus sine of hsp, h speed, times 6, comma y, obj wall. And so while we're moving into the wall, we're doing this because times 6 because it's checking 6 pixels ahead of you, I guess. And under this while loop, we'll have x minus equals 0.1 times sine of h speed. So we'll move either, it'll just move us either in a positive or a negative direction, I guess. If that makes sense. And we'll do the same thing for y. So place meeting x comma y plus sine, oops, sine v speed times 6 obj wall, and then y minus equals 0.1 times sine v speed. This should give us pretty good collisions. Oh, I messed something up. VSP. There we go. Now it should give us good collisions. All right, let's see. Yeah. All right, we can walk into this wall. And we can walk into these walls. And, yeah, we're not going through them. And we can slide against them as well. So if you walk in an angle, it slides you, you know. Doesn't just stop you dead in your tracks. That's always good. Yeah, I think we got a pretty good start on our first person shooter. Yeah. Well, anyway, that's what we were trying to accomplish for this tutorial, and I think we did it. The next tutorial will cover a lot more. We'll cover like enemies, shooting. Well, shooting for like shooting the more important, but then we'll cover the enemies and stuff like that. I don't really have like a good AI system or anything set up to show you guys or anything, but if you apply what you know about making top-down games, you can make AI if you want. But anyway, hopefully this was an okay tutorial. Check in for part 2 because part 2, yeah, I already said what we're going to cover in part 2. And then part 3, we're going to be working on ways to polish the game and make it look real pretty. Not look real pretty. It'll feel pretty though, I guess. If that makes sense. But yeah, until the next video, see you later.